Sarah Martinez stepped out of the dusty military transport vehicle, her combat boots hitting the sandy ground with a solid thud. The desert air of the forward operating base hit her face like a wall of heat, even though it was barely dawn. Around her, the sounds of military life were already in full swing. Helicopters landing and taking off, diesel engines rumbling, and the distant chatter of radio communications. She adjusted her pack on her shoulders and looked around at the temporary structures that made up the base. Concrete barriers, prefabricated buildings, and rows of military vehicles stretched as far as she could see. This was her new assignment, and she knew it wouldn't be easy. As one of the few female medical officers assigned to work directly with special operations units, Sarah understood that she would face challenges that had nothing to do with the enemy. The sun was just beginning to rise over the horizon, painting the desert landscape in shades of orange and gold. Sarah took a deep breath and walked toward the main command building, where she was supposed to report for her initial briefing. Her medical bag bounced against her hip with each step, a reminder of why she was here. Inside the command building, the air was cooler thanks to industrial air conditioning units that hummed constantly. Maps covered every wall, marked with colored pins and strategic markings. Computer screens displayed real-time intelligence feeds, and radio operators maintained constant communication with units in the field. "You must be the new medic," said a gruff voice behind her. Sarah turned to see a tall man in his 40s with graying hair and intense blue eyes. His uniform bore the insignia of a Navy SEAL commander. This was Commander Jake Morrison, the man she would be working under. "Yes, sir. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, reporting for duty," she said, snapping to attention and offering a crisp salute. Morrison looked her up and down, his expression unreadable. "I'll be honest with you, Martinez. Some of my men aren't thrilled about having a woman assigned to our unit. They think you'll be a liability in combat situations." Sarah kept her expression neutral, though inside she felt a familiar frustration. She had heard this same concern throughout her military career, despite her excellent service record and specialized training. "I understand their concerns, sir. I'm here to prove that I can do the job, nothing more." "That's what I want to hear," Morrison said, his tone warming slightly. "You'll be working primarily with Alpha Team. They're some of the best operators we have, but they're also some of the most traditional. You'll need to earn their respect." He led her through a series of corridors to a briefing room where 6 men in military fatigue sat around a rectangular table. They looked up as she entered, and Sarah could feel their skeptical gazes weighing her every move. "Gentlemen, this is Lieutenant Martinez. She'll be your new medic," Morrison announced. The men nodded politely, but Sarah could sense their reservations. She had been through this before, the polite professionalism that masked deeper doubts about her capabilities. "Why don't you tell us a bit about yourself, Lieutenant?" asked one of the men, a sergeant with dark hair and a distinctive scar running down his left cheek. "I've been in the military for 8 years, Sarah began. "I served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the 82nd Airborne before transitioning to Special Operations medical training. I've completed advanced trauma care courses, tactical combat casualty care, and specialized training in field surgery." The men listened without comment, but she could see them exchanging glances. One of them, a younger soldier with red hair, seemed particularly skeptical. "That's impressive on paper," the red-haired soldier said, "but paper doesn't always translate to performance in the field." Sarah felt her jaw tighten slightly, but she kept her voice steady. "You're absolutely right. That's why I'm here, to show you what I can do, not just tell you." Commander Morrison stepped forward. "Martinez, you'll be sharing quarters with Lieutenant Collins from the intelligence unit. She can show you around the base and help you get settled. Your first mission with Alpha Team is scheduled for next week." As the meeting broke up, Sarah gathered her things and prepared to leave. She could hear the men talking in low voices behind her, and while she couldn't make out the exact words, she could guess the nature of their conversation. Lieutenant Collins turned out to be a friendly woman in her early 30s with short blonde hair and a welcoming smile. "Don't mind them," she said as they walked toward the living quarters. "They're good men, but they've been through a lot together. It takes time for them to accept new team members, especially women." The living quarters were basic but functional. 2 single beds, a small table, and lockers for personal belongings. Sarah unpacked her gear methodically, hanging up her uniforms and organizing her medical supplies. "How long have you been here?" Sarah asked as she worked. "About 6 months," Collins replied. "I was one of the first women assigned to this forward operating base. It was rough at first, but things have gotten better. The key is proving yourself through your actions, not your words." That evening, Sarah made her way to the base dining facility. The large tent was filled with long tables where soldiers sat eating and talking. She got her meal, a typical military combination of meat, vegetables, and starch, and looked around for a place to sit. She spotted the men from Alpha Team at a corner table and decided to approach them. It was better to address any issues head-on rather than let them fester. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, standing with her tray. The men looked up in surprise, but the sergeant with the scar, she had learned his name was Rodriguez, gestured to an empty chair. "Sure, have a seat." For a few minutes they ate in relative silence. Sarah could feel the tension in the air, but she was determined to break through it. "So, Rodriguez," she said, "Commander Morrison mentioned you've been with this unit for 3 years? What's the most challenging mission you've been on?" Rodriguez looked up from his food, studying her face. "Why do you want to know?" "Because understanding what this team has been through helps me understand what I might face, and it helps me figure out how I can best support you in the field." This seemed to catch Rodriguez's attention. He set down his fork and leaned back in his chair. "We had a hostage rescue mission about 18 months ago. 3 American civilians had been captured by insurgents and were being held in a compound about 50 miles from here." The other men stopped eating and listened as Rodriguez continued. "The intel was good, but the situation went sideways fast. We breached the compound and found the hostages, but there were more enemies than we expected. Our previous medic took shrapnel in his leg during the firefight." "What happened?" Sarah asked. "He kept working," said the red-haired soldier, whose name was Thompson. "Treated 2 wounded hostages and patched up Rodriguez here while bullets were flying around us. Never complained, never asked for help." Sarah nodded, understanding the unspoken message. This was the standard she was being measured against, a medic who had proven himself under fire. "That's the kind of dedication this team needs," Rodriguez said, looking directly at Sarah. "We need to know that when things get bad, our medic won't freeze up or become a liability." "I understand," Sarah replied, "and I hope I'll have the chance to show you that I can meet that standard." The conversation continued for another hour, with the men gradually opening up about their experiences and the challenges they faced. Sarah listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions and offering her own perspectives based on her previous deployments. As they prepared to leave, Thompson turned to her. "Martinez, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Why did you choose this assignment? You could have stayed with a regular unit where things would be easier." Sarah considered the question carefully. "Because this is where I can make the biggest difference. Special operations teams face unique medical challenges, and I want to be part of the solution. Plus, someone has to be first. If I don't take this assignment, who will?" Rodriguez stood up and extended his hand. "Fair enough. We'll give you a fair chance, Martinez. But understand that we're going to push you hard. We can't afford to have weak links on this team." Sarah shook his hand firmly. "I wouldn't expect anything less." Over the next few days, Sarah immersed herself in learning the base's medical protocols and familiarizing herself with the team's standard operating procedures. She spent hours in the medical facility, checking equipment and supplies, making sure everything was organized exactly the way she wanted it. The base medical facility was well equipped for a forward operating position. It had surgical capabilities, a small pharmacy, and equipment for treating everything from routine injuries to combat trauma. Sarah made note of what supplies were available and what might need to be requested for future missions. She also began physical training with Alpha Team. Every morning at dawn, they gathered for runs around the base perimeter, followed by strength training and combat drills. The pace was intense, designed to test her physical limits. During one particularly challenging workout, Thompson pushed the team through a series of obstacle courses that simulated combat conditions. They crawled under barriers, climbed walls, and navigated through mock urban environments while carrying full gear. Sarah kept pace with the men, her smaller frame actually giving her an advantage in some of the tighter spaces. She noticed Rodriguez watching her carefully during these exercises, evaluating her performance. "Not bad, Martinez," he said after one session. "You're faster than I expected." "I may be smaller, but I've been doing this for a while," Sarah replied, wiping sweat from her forehead. The breakthrough came during a training exercise designed to simulate a medical emergency in hostile territory. The team was practicing room-clearing techniques in a mock building when Thompson suddenly dropped to the ground, clutching his arm. "Medic!" Rodriguez shouted. Sarah immediately sprinted towards Thompson, her medical bag already in her hands. She quickly assessed the situation. It was a training exercise, but Thompson was really injured. He had caught his arm on a piece of sharp metal during the drill and was bleeding significantly. Without hesitation, Sarah dropped to her knees beside him and began treating the wound. She applied pressure to stop the bleeding, cleaned the area, and began suturing the cut while the rest of the team watched. "This is going to need about 12 stitches," she said calmly as she worked. "The cut is deep but clean. You'll be back to full duty in a week." Her hands moved efficiently and confidently as she treated Thompson's injury. She talked him through what she was doing, keeping him calm and distracted from the pain.
"Where did you learn to suture like that?"
asked another team member, Mitchell, who had been watching in silence.
"Practice,"
Sarah replied without looking up from her work. "Lots and lots of practice. Plus, I worked in an emergency room before joining the military. You see everything there." When she finished treating Thompson's wound, she helped him to his feet and walked with him to the base medical facility for a final check. The rest of the team followed, and Sarah could sense that something had changed in their attitude toward her. That evening, Rodriguez approached her in the dining facility. "Martinez, I owe you an apology." Sarah looked up from her meal in surprise. "For what?" "I was ready to write you off before you even got here. I figured you'd be another checkbox assignment. Someone the brass sent to make themselves feel better about diversity without considering whether you could actually do the job." "And now?" Rodriguez sat down across from her. "Now I think maybe we were wrong. The way you handled Thompson's injury today, that was exactly what we need. You didn't panic. You didn't ask for help. You just did the job." Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction, but she kept her expression neutral. "I appreciate that, but one incident doesn't prove everything. I still need to show you what I can do in a real combat situation." "Fair point," Rodriguez agreed. "But it's a good start. The team is starting to come around." Over the following days, Sarah noticed a definite shift in how the team treated her. The polite distance was replaced by genuine camaraderie. They included her in their conversations, asked for her input on tactical matters related to medical support, and treated her like a full member of the unit. She learned about each team member's background and specialties. Rodriguez was the team sergeant, with expertise in demolitions and small unit tactics. Thompson was their communications specialist. Mitchell was a sniper with an uncanny ability to hit targets at extreme distances. Jackson was their breacher, responsible for getting the team through locked doors and barriers. Williams was their intelligence analyst, who could speak 3 languages fluently. Each man brought unique skills to the team, and Sarah was beginning to understand how her medical expertise fit into their overall capabilities. She wasn't just along for the ride. She was an integral part of their mission success. Commander Morrison called her into his office toward the end of her first week. "How are things going with Alpha Team?" he asked. "Better than I expected, sir. There was some initial skepticism, but I think we're past that now." "Good, because I have news. Your first mission has been moved up. You'll be going out tomorrow night." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "What's the mission?" "Intelligence gathering. We've identified a compound where we believe high-value targets are meeting. Your job is to provide medical support for the team and treat any civilians who might be injured during the operation." Morrison handed her a folder containing mission briefings and satellite photos of the target area. "Study this carefully. The team will brief you on the tactical aspects this afternoon." Sarah spent the rest of the day reviewing the mission materials and preparing her medical gear. She checked and double-checked her supplies, making sure she had everything she might need for treating both combat injuries and civilian casualties. That afternoon, Alpha Team gathered in a secure briefing room for their final mission planning session. A large screen displayed aerial photographs of their target, and Rodriguez used a laser pointer to indicate key features of the compound. "Intelligence suggests there are between 8 and 12 hostiles in the compound," he explained. "Our primary objective is to gather information about their operations and capture any high-value targets if possible." He turned to Sarah. "Martinez, your job is to stay with the command element and be ready to provide medical support as needed. If we encounter civilians, you may need to treat them as well." Sarah nodded, absorbing the tactical information and mentally preparing herself for her first real combat mission with the team. She had trained for this moment for months, but she knew that no amount of training could fully prepare someone for the reality of combat. As the briefing concluded, Thompson approached her. "How are you feeling about tomorrow?" "Nervous," Sarah admitted, "but ready." "This is what I've been training for." "Good. Just remember, trust your training, trust your teammates, and trust yourself. You've got this." That night, Sarah lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through various scenarios and contingencies. She thought about her family back home, about the path that had led her to this moment, and about the responsibilities she would face in just a few hours. She had worked hard to get to this point, overcoming skepticism and prejudice at every step of her military career. Tomorrow would be another test, but she was confident in her abilities and in the team that had finally accepted her as one of their own. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Sarah's hand unconsciously moved to her left shoulder, where beneath her uniform lay a tattoo that told a story few people knew. It was a story that would soon become relevant in ways she could never have imagined. The helicopter's rotors cut through the night air with a rhythmic thump that Sarah could feel in her chest. She sat between Rodriguez and Thompson, her medical gear secured in a pack at her feet. The red lights inside the aircraft gave everything an otherworldly appearance as Alpha Team prepared for insertion. Sarah checked her watch. They were 15 minutes out from the target. Around her, the team members were making final preparations, checking weapons and communication equipment with practiced efficiency. She ran through her own mental checklist, thinking about the medical supplies she carried and the various scenarios she might face. The compound they were approaching sat in a valley between two low hills, surrounded by farmland that had been abandoned due to ongoing conflict in the region. Intelligence suggested it was being used as a meeting place for insurgent leaders planning attacks against coalition forces. 5 minutes, the crew chief announced over the helicopter's intercom system. Rodriguez leaned over to Sarah. Remember, stay close to the command element. If shooting starts, get to cover immediately. Don't try to be a hero. Sarah nodded, understanding the wisdom behind his words. Her job was to keep the team healthy, not to engage in firefights. But she also knew that sometimes circumstances didn't give you a choice about what role you played. The helicopter began its descent, and Sarah could see the target compound through the small window beside her seat. It consisted of several buildings arranged around a central courtyard, with high walls surrounding the entire complex. Vehicles were parked outside, indicating that people were indeed present. The aircraft touched down in a field about half a mile from the target, and Alpha Team quickly disembarked. The helicopter immediately lifted off again, leaving them alone in the darkness of the desert night. The silence after the engine noise was almost deafening. Rodriguez signaled for the team to move out, and they began their approach to the compound. Sarah stayed in the middle of the formation, her medical bag secured tightly to her back. The weight of her gear was familiar and comfortable. She had trained with this exact loadout dozens of times. As they moved across the rough terrain, Sarah's mind was completely focused on the mission. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every sound could indicate danger. The team moved with silent precision, communicating through hand signals and brief whispers when necessary. They reached the outer wall of the compound without incident. Rodriguez held up his hand, signaling for the team to stop while he assessed the situation. Through her night vision goggles, Sarah could see two guards walking along the top of the wall, automatic rifles slung over their shoulders. Mitchell, the team sniper, silently moved to a position where he could cover the guards. His rifle was equipped with a suppressor, allowing him to neutralize threats without alerting the entire compound. Rodriguez waited until Mitchell was in position before signaling the next phase of the operation. Jackson, their breacher, approached a side gate and began working on the lock with specialized tools. Within minutes, he had the gate open, and the team slipped inside the compound walls. Sarah's heart was pounding, but her hands were steady and her mind was clear. The first building they needed to clear was a small guardhouse near the main entrance. Rodriguez and Thompson approached from one side, while Jackson and Williams took the other. Sarah remained with Mitchell, who was providing overwatch from a concealed position. The guardhouse was empty, but they found evidence of recent activity: cigarette butts, coffee cups, and communication equipment. This confirmed that the compound was actively being used, just as intelligence had suggested. As they moved toward the main building, Sarah heard voices coming from inside. Rodriguez held up his hand again, and the team froze in place. Through her headset, she could hear Williams translating the conversation from Arabic to English. "They're discussing an attack planned for next week," Williams whispered. "Something about targeting a convoy route. This is exactly the intelligence we need." Rodriguez made the decision to proceed with the mission. They needed to get closer to gather more detailed information about the planned attack. The team split into two elements, with Rodriguez leading one group to secure the building's rear exit, while Thompson led the other to the main entrance. Sarah stayed with Rodriguez's element as they moved around the building. She could see lights in several windows, and the voices were getting louder. Whatever meeting was taking place inside seemed to be reaching an important point. That's when everything went wrong. A dog started barking somewhere in the compound, and suddenly there were shouts of alarm from inside the building. The insurgents had realized they were not alone. Rodriguez immediately switched to Plan B, calling for the team to move to their backup positions. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions as the insurgents responded to the perceived threat. Sarah dove behind a concrete barrier as bullets whined overhead. The carefully planned stealth operation had become a firefight in a matter of seconds. "Martinez, stay down!" Rodriguez shouted over the sound of automatic weapons fire. Sarah pressed herself against the barrier, her medical instincts warring with her training to stay safe. Through the chaos, she could hear team members calling out positions and targets as they engaged the enemy. Mitchell's sniper rifle cracked repeatedly as he picked off targets from his overwatch position. Jackson was laying down, suppressing fire with his automatic weapon, keeping the insurgents pinned down while the rest of the team maneuvered. "Thompson's hit!" Williams called out over the radio. Sarah's training took over. Despite Rodriguez's orders to stay in cover, she grabbed her medical bag and sprinted towards Thompson's position. Bullets kicked up dirt around her feet as she ran, but she didn't hesitate. She found Thompson behind a low wall, clutching his shoulder. Blood was seeping between his fingers, and his face was pale with pain and shock. Sarah immediately went to work, cutting away his uniform to expose the wound. "How bad is it?" Thompson asked through gritted teeth. "Bullet went clean through," Sarah replied, working quickly to clean and bandage the injury. "You're going to be fine, but you're out of the fight for now." She gave Thompson a shot of morphine for the pain and applied a pressure bandage to control the bleeding. The wound was serious but not life-threatening if treated properly. As she worked, the firefight continued around them. "Can you move?" she asked. Thompson tested his good arm and nodded. "Yeah, I can make it." Sarah helped him to a more secure position behind a larger barrier, then prepared to return to her assigned location. But as she turned to leave, she saw Rodriguez go down about 30 meters away. Without thinking, she sprinted toward him, her medical bag bouncing against her hip. Rodriguez had taken a bullet to the leg and was unable to move. Sarah skidded to a stop beside him and immediately began assessing his injuries. "What are you doing?" Rodriguez shouted. "I told you to stay in cover. You're wounded," Sarah replied calmly, already working on his leg. "This is my job." The bullet had hit Rodriguez in the upper thigh, missing the major blood vessels but causing significant muscle damage. Sarah applied a tourniquet to control the bleeding and gave him a shot of morphine. As she worked, a new threat emerged. 3 insurgents had flanked the team's position and were moving toward them with rifles raised. Sarah saw them first and shouted a warning to the team. Mitchell's sniper rifle cracked again, dropping one of the insurgents instantly. Jackson engaged the other 2 with his automatic weapon, but they had found good cover and were returning accurate fire. Sarah finished treating Rodriguez and helped him to a defensive position where he could continue fighting despite his injury. The team sergeant refused to be evacuated while his men were still in danger. "We need to get out of here," Rodriguez said into his radio. "Call for extraction." Williams was already working on contacting their helicopter support, but the aircraft was still 20 minutes away. The team needed to hold their position and survive until help arrived. The firefight continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Sarah moved from position to position, treating injuries and keeping the team fighting effective. Her fear had completely disappeared, replaced by the focused determination that came with doing the job she was trained for. During a brief lull in the shooting, she heard something that made her blood run cold. A child crying somewhere inside the main building. There were civilians in the compound, probably family members of the insurgents. "Rodriguez, there are kids in there," she said over the radio. "I hear them," Rodriguez replied grimly. "But we can't do anything about it right now. We need to focus on getting out of here alive." Sarah understood the tactical reality, but the sound of frightened children tugged at her conscience. These were innocent people caught in the middle of a conflict they probably didn't understand. The extraction helicopter finally arrived, its searchlight cutting through the darkness as it circled the compound. The pilot reported that the landing zone was too hot. There was too much enemy fire for a safe pickup. "We need to move to the backup landing zone," Rodriguez ordered. "It's about half a mile north of here." Moving wounded team members half a mile while under fire was going to be extremely dangerous, but they had no choice. Sarah helped Thompson to his feet while Jackson assisted Rodriguez. The team would have to fight their way out. They moved in bounds, with some team members providing covering fire while others advanced. Sarah stayed with the wounded, making sure their injuries didn't worsen during the movement. Her medical pack felt heavier now, and she was beginning to feel the effects of adrenaline and exhaustion. Halfway to the extraction point, they encountered another group of insurgents who had positioned themselves to block their escape route. A fierce firefight erupted as the two forces engaged at close range. During the battle, Sarah saw Williams go down with what looked like a serious head injury. She immediately moved to treat him, but as she worked, she realized that her medical supplies were running low. She had used most of her bandages and morphine treating the other wounded team members. Williams was unconscious, with a deep gash on his forehead from shrapnel or a ricocheting bullet. Sarah cleaned the wound and applied the last of her pressure bandages, but she was worried about possible brain injury. "How is he?" Rodriguez asked, having moved to their position. "Serious head wound," Sarah replied. "He needs immediate medical evacuation." "I'm not sure how much longer he can wait." Rodriguez made the difficult decision to call for an emergency medical evacuation helicopter, even though it meant exposing the aircraft to enemy fire. Williams's life was more important than tactical considerations. The team continued moving toward the extraction point, now carrying one unconscious team member and supporting two walking wounded. Sarah stayed close to Williams, monitoring his vital signs and watching for any changes in his condition. They finally reached the backup landing zone, a small clearing surrounded by low hills. The extraction helicopter was already inbound, its pilot having volunteered to attempt the dangerous pickup despite ongoing enemy fire. As the helicopter settled into the landing zone, Sarah helped load Williams into the aircraft. She climbed aboard with him, continuing to monitor his condition during the flight back to base. The other wounded team members were stable enough to wait for proper medical treatment. During the flight, Sarah reflected on what had happened during the mission. The team had successfully gathered intelligence about the planned insurgent attack, but the cost had been high. 3 team members were wounded, and 1 was in critical condition. But something else had happened during the firefight, something that would change how Alpha Team saw her forever. She had proven herself under fire, demonstrating not just medical competence but also courage and dedication to her teammates. As the helicopter approached the base, Sarah could see medical personnel waiting on the landing pad. She had radioed ahead with Williams's condition, and they were prepared to take him directly to the surgical facility. The helicopter touched down, and Williams was quickly transferred to a stretcher and rushed into the medical facility. Sarah accompanied him, providing a detailed briefing to the surgical team about his injuries and the treatment he had received in the field. After Williams was in surgery, Sarah finally allowed herself to sit down and process what had happened. Her uniform was torn and dirty, stained with blood from treating the wounded team members. Her hands were shaking slightly as the adrenaline wore off. Rodriguez found her in the waiting area outside the surgical facility. His leg was bandaged and he was walking with crutches, but he insisted on checking on his team members personally. "How's Williams?" he asked. "The surgeons are optimistic," Sarah replied. "The head injury looks worse than it is. He should make a full recovery." Rodriguez sat down beside her, wincing slightly as he adjusted his injured leg. "Martinez, I owe you more than an apology. What you did out there tonight, that was extraordinary." Sarah looked at him in surprise. "I just did my job." "No, you did more than your job. You saved Thompson's life, probably saved mine too. And you did it while bullets were flying all around us. That takes courage." Over the next few hours, word of Sarah's actions during the mission spread throughout the base. She had not only provided excellent medical care under extreme conditions, but she had also shown the kind of bravery and dedication that special operations units valued above all else. Thompson was treated and released within a few hours, his shoulder wound properly cleaned and sutured. Rodriguez would need several weeks of physical therapy for his leg, but he was expected to make a complete recovery. Williams remained in intensive care, but the doctors were confident that he would be fine. Commander Morrison called Sarah into his office the next morning. "I've read the after-action reports from last night's mission. I'm impressed." "Thank you, sir. The team performed exceptionally well under difficult circumstances." "Including you," Morrison said. "Rodriguez specifically mentioned your actions in his report. He said you saved 3 lives last night." Sarah felt a surge of pride, but she tried to remain modest. The team training worked exactly as it was supposed to. Everyone did their job. Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "Martinez, I'm recommending you for a commendation. What you did last night was above and beyond the call of duty." As Sarah left Morrison's office, she felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond personal recognition. She had proven herself to Alpha Team, but more importantly, she had proven herself to herself. The doubts and insecurities that had plagued her throughout her military career were finally beginning to fade. That evening, the uninjured members of Alpha Team gathered in the dining facility for what had become an informal tradition after difficult missions, sharing a meal and talking through what had happened. Sarah joined them, no longer feeling like an outsider but as a full member of the unit. "So, Martinez," Mitchell said as they sat around the table, "I guess we can officially say you're one of us now." Sarah smiled, feeling the warmth of acceptance and belonging. "I appreciate that. This team means a lot to me." The conversation gradually turned to lighter topics, and Sarah found herself laughing at the team's jokes and stories. For the first time since arriving at the base, she felt completely at ease with her new unit. But as the evening wore on, the conversation took an unexpected turn that would lead to a revelation no one was prepared for. 3 weeks had passed since the compound mission, and Alpha Team had settled into a comfortable rhythm with Sarah as their medic. Williams had returned to duty with no lasting effects from his head injury, and both Thompson and Rodriguez had recovered fully from their wounds. The team's confidence in Sarah was now absolute, and she had become an integral part of their operations. Sarah was in the medical facility restocking supplies for their next mission when Thompson approached her with an unusual request. "Martinez, can I ask you something kind of personal?" Sarah looked up from the medical supplies she was organizing. "Sure, what's on your mind?" Thompson seemed nervous, which was unusual for him. He was normally one of the more confident members of the team. "It's about your tattoo." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "What tattoo?" "The one on your shoulder. I caught a glimpse of it when you were treating my wound that night. It looked like military insignia, but I couldn't make it out clearly." Sarah's mind raced. She had been very careful to keep her tattoo concealed since arriving at the base. It contained information that she wasn't ready to share with the team, information that would completely change how they saw her. "It's nothing important," she said, trying to keep her voice casual. "Just some artwork I got when I was younger." But Thompson wasn't satisfied with that answer. "It didn't look like artwork to me. It looked like unit insignia, special operations insignia." Before Sarah could respond, Rodriguez walked into the medical facility. He had been coming in for regular checkups on his leg wound, which was healing well. He immediately picked up on the tension in the room. "What's going on?" he asked. Thompson turned to him. "I was asking Martinez about her tattoo, the one on her shoulder." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "What tattoo?" Sarah felt cornered. She had hoped to avoid this conversation indefinitely, but it seemed that was no longer possible. The team had accepted her based on her medical skills and courage under fire, not on her background. She wasn't sure how they would react to the truth. "Look, it's really not important," she said, turning back to her supplies. But Rodriguez wasn't going to let it go. "Martinez, we're a team. We don't keep secrets from each other. If there's something about your background that we should know, then tell us." Sarah set down the medical supplies and turned to face both men. She could see that they weren't going to drop the subject. The trust and camaraderie she had built with the team was based on honesty and mutual respect. Continuing to evade their questions would only damage that relationship. "Fine," she said quietly. "But you're not going to believe it." She reached up and began unbuttoning the top of her uniform shirt, revealing the edge of a tattoo on her left shoulder. Both men watched in silence as she pulled back the fabric to expose the complete design. The tattoo was intricate and professionally done, featuring the distinctive eagle and anchor symbol of the U.S. Navy SEALs, surrounded by text that neither man could read clearly from their position. Thompson stepped closer to get a better look, and his eyes widened in shock. "Holy shit," he whispered. Rodriguez moved closer as well, and Sarah could see the disbelief on his face as he took in what he was seeing. The tattoo wasn't just SEAL insignia. It was specific unit markings that indicated not only that Sarah had served with the SEALs, but that she had been part of GRU, the elite SEAL Team 6. "This can't be real," Rodriguez said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah rebuttoned her shirt and looked at both men. "I was part of SEAL Team 6 for 2 years. I left the unit 3 years ago and transferred to conventional forces." The silence in the medical facility was deafening. Thompson and Rodriguez stared at her in complete shock, their minds struggling to process what she had just revealed. "Women can't be SEALs," Thompson said finally. "It's not possible." "Officially, you're right," Sarah replied. "Women weren't allowed in direct combat roles until recently, but there were exceptions made for certain specialized personnel, especially medical personnel, when the mission requirements demanded it. Rodriguez sat down heavily on one of the medical chairs. You're telling me that you're not just a regular medic. You're a former SEAL Team 6 operator. Sarah nodded. I was part of a pilot program that placed female medical personnel with special operations units for missions that required treating female civilians or children. The program was highly classified, and very few people knew about it. But your records, Thompson said. There's no mention of SEAL training or DEVGR GRU service. Because it's classified, Sarah explained. My official service record shows my time with the 82nd Airborne, and then my transition to Special Operations medical training. The SEAL service is buried so deep that most people with standard security clearances would never see it. Rodriguez was shaking his head in disbelief. This is insane. You're telling me that the new medic who we thought might be a liability is actually one of the most elite operators in the entire military? Was, Sarah corrected. I left that world behind for a reason. What reason? Thompson asked. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with whether to share more of her story. Finally, she spoke. My last mission with DEVR GRU was a hostage rescue in Southeast Asia. 3 American aid workers had been kidnapped by terrorists and were being held in a remote compound. Intelligence suggested that one of the hostages was a young woman who had been injured during the kidnapping. She paused, her eyes distant as she remembered the events. The mission went perfectly from a tactical standpoint. We breached the compound, neutralized the terrorists, and rescued the hostages. But the woman had been tortured. Badly. She was in shock, completely terrified of everyone around her, especially men in military gear. Thompson and Rodriguez listened in silence, beginning to understand the weight of what Sarah was sharing with them. I was able to calm her down and treat her injuries, Sarah continued. But what happened to her? What those animals did to her? It changed something in me. I realized that I wanted to focus on healing, not killing. I wanted to save lives, not take them. So you left Devengru, Rodriguez said. It wasn't an easy decision. The unit was like family to me, but I needed to find a different way to serve. I thought joining a regular medical unit would give me that chance. But you ended up back with special operations anyway, Thompson observed. Sarah smiled slightly. Apparently, I can't escape this world, but this assignment is different. I'm here purely as a medic. I'm not carrying weapons. I'm not kicking down doors. I'm just trying to keep good people alive. Rodriguez stood up and began pacing around the medical facility, his mind working through the implications of what Sarah had revealed. Do the other team members know about this?
No, and I'd like to keep it that way, Sarah said.
I don't want my past to overshadow the relationships I've built here. I want to be valued for what I bring to this team now, not for what I used to do. Thompson was still staring at her in amazement. But Martinez, do you understand what this means? You're not just qualified to be our medic. You're probably more qualified than any of us to be leading missions. That's exactly why I don't want anyone else to know, Sarah replied firmly. I didn't come here to take over the team or to show off my credentials. I came here to do a job, and I want to be judged on how well I do that job. Rodriguez stopped pacing and looked at her directly. Martinez, or should I say, Chief Martinez. Lieutenant is fine, Sarah said quickly. I gave up my SEAL rank when I transferred out. Okay, Lieutenant, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Sarah nodded. Are you here on some kind of special assignment? Are you reporting back to DevGru or some other command about our operations? The question caught Sarah off guard, and she could see why Rodriguez would be concerned. The sudden appearance of a former DevGru operator on their team could seem like more than a coincidence. No, she said emphatically. I requested this assignment through normal channels. I wanted to get back into special operations medicine, and this position was available. There's no hidden agenda. Rodriguez studied her face carefully, looking for any sign of deception. After a long moment, he seemed satisfied with her answer. All right, I believe you, but we have a problem. What kind of problem? Commander Morrison. We need to tell him about this. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Why? Because he's our commanding officer, and he has a right to know if one of his personnel has a background that could affect operations. Plus, if this comes out later and he finds out we knew about it, we could all be in serious trouble. Thompson nodded in agreement. Rodriguez is right. We can't keep this from Morrison. Sarah understood their position, but she was terrified of how Morrison might react. She had worked hard to build trust and credibility with Alpha Team based on her medical skills, If Morrison saw her as a former DEDE GRU operator instead of a medic, it could completely change the dynamic of her assignment. What if he decides to transfer me out? She asked. Then we'll fight it, Rodriguez said firmly. You've proven yourself to this team, and we're not going to let you go without a fight. The three of them agreed to approach Morrison together that afternoon. Sarah spent the rest of the morning in a state of nervous anticipation, unsure of how her commanding officer would react to learning about her hidden background. At 1400 hours, Rodriguez, Thompson, and Sarah knocked on Morrison's office door. The commander invited them in and gestured for them to sit in the chairs arranged in front of his desk. "What can I do for you?" Morrison asked, noting the serious expressions on their faces. Rodriguez took the lead. "Sir, we have something important to discuss with you regarding Lieutenant Martinez's background." Morrison's eyebrows went up. "Oh? What kind of background information?" Sarah took a deep breath and decided to tell the story herself. "Sir, I need to inform you that my service record is incomplete. I served with SEAL Team 6 for 2 years before transferring to conventional forces." Morrison's reaction was immediate and dramatic. He leaned forward in his chair, his eyes widening in shock. "Excuse me, I was part of a classified program that placed female medical personnel with special operations units. My Devon GRU service doesn't appear in my standard personnel file because it's classified at a higher level." Morrison stood up and walked around his desk, studying Sarah's face carefully. "You're telling me that you're a former DEF GRU operator?"
Yes, sir.
The commander was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, he returned to his chair and picked up his phone. "I need to make some calls," he said. "Lieutenant Martinez, I'm going to need you to provide me with your complete service history, including unit assignments, mission details, and commanding officers from your DEF GRU service." Sarah felt her heart sinking. This was exactly what she had feared would happen. "Sir, with respect, most of that information is classified beyond your clearance level." Morrison's expression hardened. "Lieutenant, if you're assigned to my command, then I need to know everything about your background that could affect my operations. I'll get whatever clearances I need." Over the next 3 hours, Morrison made a series of phone calls to various commands and intelligence agencies. Sarah waited outside his office with Rodriguez and Thompson, her anxiety growing with each passing minute. Finally, Morrison called them back into his office. His expression was unreadable as he looked at Sarah. "I've confirmed your story with JSOC," he said. "Your service record is legitimate, and your former commanding officers speak very highly of your abilities." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. "However," Morrison continued, "this raises some serious questions about your assignment to this unit. Sir, Lieutenant Martinez, you're not just qualified to serve as a medic with my special operations team. You're qualified to command special operations teams. The fact that you're here in a support role suggests that either you're here for reasons other than what you've told us, or you're running from something in your past." Sarah felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment and anger. "Sir, I've been completely honest about my reasons for being here. I wanted to focus on medical support rather than direct action operations." Morrison leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "I believe you, but I need to ask, would you be willing to take on additional responsibilities with this unit? Your experience and training are exactly what we need for some of our more complex operations." Sarah felt a familiar internal conflict. Part of her missed the adrenaline and challenge of direct action missions. But she had left that world behind for good reasons, and she wasn't sure she wanted to return to it. "Sir, I appreciate the confidence, but I'm here as a medic. That's the job I want to do." Morrison nodded slowly. "I understand, and I respect your decision. But I want you to know that if you ever change your mind, there's a place for you in a leadership role with this unit." As they left Morrison's office, Rodriguez and Thompson were full of questions about Sarah's Devon GRU experiences, but she deflected most of their inquiries, still uncomfortable with the attention her background was drawing. Over the following days, word of Sarah's true background began to spread throughout the base. Despite her wishes for discretion, it was impossible to keep such information completely secret. Soldiers began treating her with a new level of respect that bordered on awe. Some members of Alpha Team struggled to adjust to the revelation. Jackson, in particular, seemed uncomfortable with the idea that their medic was actually more qualified than he was for many aspects of their missions. "It just feels weird," he confided to Thompson one evening. "Here I am thinking I'm some kind of badass special operator, and our medic has done more high-level missions than all of us combined." Thompson tried to reassure him. It doesn't change anything about who we are or what we do. Martinez is here as our medic, not as our commanding officer. But the dynamic had changed, and everyone could feel it. Sarah found herself being consulted on tactical decisions that had nothing to do with medical support. Team members would ask for her opinion on mission planning and equipment selection. The situation came to a head during a mission briefing for a particularly complex operation. Alpha Team was tasked with rescuing a captured intelligence officer who was being held in a heavily fortified compound deep in enemy territory. Morrison was leading the briefing, using satellite imagery and intelligence reports to outline the challenges they would face. The target compound was surrounded by multiple defensive positions, and intelligence suggested that there were at least 20 enemy fighters protecting the prisoner. "This is going to be one of the most difficult missions you've undertaken," Morrison told the team. "The risks are significant, and the margin for error is practically zero." As Morrison outlined the planned approach to the compound, Sarah noticed several tactical problems with the plan. The approach route would expose the team to enemy fire from multiple positions, and the extraction plan didn't account for the possibility of the prisoner being injured or unable to move quickly. She wrestled with whether to speak up. On one hand, she was here as a medic, not a tactical advisor. On the other hand, she could see flaws in the plan that could get people killed. Finally, she couldn't remain silent any longer. "Sir, I have some concerns about the approach route." Morrison looked at her in surprise. "Oh? What kind of concerns?" Sarah stood up and moved to the map display. "The planned route takes us directly past these two defensive positions. Even with suppressing fire, we'll be exposed for too long. There's an alternative approach from the north that would give us better concealment." She traced an alternate route on the map, explaining how the team could use natural terrain features to mask their approach. Her analysis was detailed and professional, drawing on years of experience with similar operations. Morrison studied her proposed route carefully. "This is good tactical thinking, Martinez, but it would add another hour to the mission timeline." "Yes, sir, but it significantly reduces the risk of casualties during the approach. And if we're dealing with wounded prisoners or team members, that extra time invested in the approach could save lives during the extraction." The rest of Alpha Team watched this exchange with fascination. They were seeing Sarah in a completely different light, not just as their medic, but as a seasoned operator with valuable tactical insights. After the briefing, Morrison pulled Sarah aside. "That was excellent analysis. Are you sure you don't want to take on a larger role in mission planning?" Sarah shook her head. "Sir, I'm here to provide medical support, but if I see something that could prevent casualties, I'm going to speak up." Morrison smiled. "Fair enough, but I want you to know that your tactical input is always welcome." The mission itself went exactly as Sarah had predicted. Her suggested approach route allowed the team to reach the target compound without being detected. They successfully rescued the captured intelligence officer, who turned out to have several broken ribs and was unable to move quickly on his own. Sarah's medical skills proved crucial during the extraction. She was able to stabilize the prisoner's injuries and help him move despite his pain. The mission was a complete success with no casualties among Alpha Team. As they returned to base, Rodriguez approached Sarah during the helicopter flight. "Martinez," he said, speaking loudly over the engine noise, "I owe you another apology." "For what now?" "For ever doubting that you belonged on this team. You're not just a great medic. You're one of the best operators I've ever worked with." Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions. She was proud of her contributions to the mission's success, but she was also concerned about how her role with the team was evolving. She had come here to escape the world of direct action operations, but that world seemed determined to follow her. Back at base, Commander Morrison called her into his office for a private conversation. "Martinez, I've been thinking about our earlier conversation regarding your role with this unit." "Yes, sir." "I'm wondering if you might be willing to consider a compromise. What if we created a new position for you, senior medical advisor and tactical consultant? You would still be primarily responsible for medical support, but you would also provide input on mission planning and tactical decisions." Sarah considered the proposal carefully. It would allow her to use her full range of skills while still focusing on the medical support roles she preferred. "Would I still be working primarily with Alpha Team?" "Yes, but you might occasionally be called upon to support other teams as well. Your expertise is too valuable to limit to a single unit." Sarah thought about her teammates, Rodriguez, Thompson, Williams, Jackson, and Mitchell. Over the past few months, they'd become more than just colleagues. They were family. She didn't want to lose that relationship, but she also realized that she could make a bigger contribution to the overall mission. I'll consider it, sir. But I need some time to think about it. Of course. Take all the time you need. That evening, Sarah sat on her bunk, staring at her reflection in the small mirror mounted on the wall. The face looking back at her had changed since she arrived at the forward operating base. There was a confidence there that hadn't been present before, a sense of belonging and purpose. She thought about her journey from DEDU operator to conventional medic to special operations medical advisor. Each step had brought new challenges and new opportunities for growth. Maybe it was time to stop running from her past and start embracing all the skills and experiences she had to offer. The next morning, she knocked on Morrison's office door. "Sir, I've made my decision about the new position." Morrison looked up from his paperwork. "And? I accept, sir, but with one condition." "What condition?" "Alpha Team remains my primary responsibility. Whatever other duties I take on, they come first." Morrison smiled and extended his hand. "Deal. Welcome to your new role, Senior Medical Advisor Martinez." As Sarah shook Morrison's hand, she realized that she had finally found the perfect balance between her desire to heal and her training as a warrior. She would continue to save lives, but she would also use all of her skills to protect the people who had become her family. The tattoo on her shoulder would no longer be a secret, but it would serve as a reminder of the journey that had brought her to this moment. She was no longer running from her past. She was using it to build a better future for herself and her team.